in the past that are picked and chosen by the public defender that should or shouldn't be held admissible in court. How do you feel about that?
Well, if it's relevant to his mental state when he engaged in this horrific conduct, then I think it should be relevant to the issue. I mean, the fact that he's making threats and whatnot, I think that's probably relevant, I would say.
Now, much has been made of his mindset in the months, even years before all of this took place, and how the communication of this somehow never happened. In other words, we never found out what was going on. So there was a failure on the part of a variety of agencies at the police level, at the FBI level. What is the cure for that? Because I thought after 9/11, we were much more astute about that. And then, of course, came the Patriot Day bombings in Boston, where, you know, the FBI and other authorities on the federal level were investigating the Tsarnaev brothers. But local police had no idea.
Yeah, I mean, what we had here is apparently the FBI has already admitted that they didn't take the tip seriously. I don't want to say they didn't take the tip seriously, but they didn't investigate the one tip that they had fully. And so we need to get the investigation and find out why that didn't happen. And those are the processes that need to be cured, because you're right. I think we see time and again where there is information out there, there is one agency that knows about it. And this goes all the way back even to the Gabby Gifford shooting,
right,
where one knows about it, but the others are not communicating. And this is a real problem.
You know, Congressman, and thank you for your indulgence with this breaking news here, but we're told that the president does want to meet with Florida teachers and students, presumably in the White House on Thursday. Among some of the things he has talked about being open to discussion is improving gun background checks. Others have said that, or simply tightening the laws that exist already for those checks. How do you feel about that?
Well, the Fix NICS bill that came the House wasn't, in my opinion, it actually might have made it worse and didn't facilitate communication. We need to, that's really what needs to happen is to instill communication between these agencies, the mental health agencies and the law enforcement agencies that are issuing these licenses. We need to make sure those are cleared up. I have no problem with the background checks that are in place, but there's some flaws in it. It's obvious that there's some flaws in it, and we need to find out what those are and fix them. And so I don't have a problem with it. I think most of my colleagues feel the same way.
Do you feel the same way as the president on the FBI botching or dropping this intelligence that had been conveyed to them by someone who obviously knew Mr. Cruz quite well, that he was a danger, a threat, increasingly saying a lot of dangerous and threatening things, and yet that was not relayed? And this was recently 6 weeks ago. The president said maybe because the FBI was so distracted on this Russia investigation. Is there any way to compare what seemed like legal apples and oranges, or what do you think?
Well, I'm not, I'm not sure that that's the case. I think that the FBI has plenty of resources and is a very capable agency. Somebody missed something here, and that's why the investigation has to take place.
So you don't think it was a distraction or a lack of resources that heretofore went to the Russia investigation? Because everyone I talk to said that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't think that that's necessarily the case.
Okay. Now, when it's coming to records that you can or cannot allow in a court case against, in this case, Nicholas Cruz, I mean, the question is going to be asked whether someone like this had access and could get access to buying a gun. And that's because he might have had a history of mental issues or even violent issues, but that somehow never made it to his records, which a gun store owner would have access to before approving or denying, a license for a gun or getting a gun. Do you believe that there should be a better standard by which we can track those who, even anecdotally, have worried others?
Well, I mean, that becomes basically a Star Chamber-esque thing, because people right. misuse the system as it is already. I mean, so
you fear this would go too far and not necessarily catch the criminal intent?
Exactly. I think it has the potential to really get overly broad. Absolutely.
Okay. If you could just hang in there, Congressman. I want to bring former FBI Assistant Director Chris Swecker into this. You're watching a live shot inside this Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Broward County courtroom where the assailants, public defender, is trying to argue about keeping certain court records sealed that might be damaging either to his case or might be unfairly biasing his case. Anyone's guess as to what that could be. But Chris, a lot of it goes back to this Snapchat video in which he's harming himself, cutting his arms, and making a number of threatening remarks. Should that be something that is included? Because a lot of other things are going to be.
Well, when it comes to this type of threat and violence, I think everything has to be on the table. We give banks safe harbor when they report suspicious banking transactions. We should be able, nobody should be afraid to report information because of HIPAA or being sued or some privacy law. And I think that that's something that's not being discussed right now, is that whole aspect of fear on the part of people to actually report activities and proactively follow up on it, and then take it to the police department wherever it needs to go.
Chris, when you hear this back and forth, I was discussing with the congressman about whether this makes the FBI look bad and maybe its resources were compromised because, as the president said, it was all focused on this Russia investigation, and its real job of chasing down potential problem cases or potential mass killers like this was compromised. Do you buy that?
No, I don't buy that. That's ludicrous. What you're talking about here is a policy or a strategy that was implemented after 9/11 to funnel all FBI tips into one place so they could supposedly connect the dots. So under this scheme, everything on the tip line goes to in the catacombs of West Virginia at the Criminal Information Justice System, and it is it's a sterile environment in the sense that it's an assembly line call center type environment. I think that has nothing to do with the Russia investigation. It's not diverting any resources from anywhere. It just is a policy and a practice that we need to overhaul and revisit.
All right, now you've heard by now the criticism of the FBI, Chris, about how it dropped the ball on this one, this phone call on the 5th of January from someone who knew Cruz very, very well, that, detailing all the problems that he had, sporadic rantings on social media, harming animals, a threat to himself, a threat to others, increasingly crazy actings and behavior, on that somehow that was not communicated, I guess, to the FBI Miami office. And the FBI director himself came out and apologized for that. The governor of Florida has come out and said, he should resign over that. What do you think of that?
Well, as Chris has admitted, this is a colossal mistake on the part of the FBI, and I think it's a breakdown deep down inside that call center. It's not something that would have raised up to Chris Wray's level, but perhaps it should have time as he drinks from the fire hose and gets used to being the director of the FBI. I doubt that he had turned his attention to that just yet, but it is something that it's public interfacing. It needs to be looked at and it needs to be fixed. There's no way to gloss this over. It's a huge mistake.
Congressman, we still have you, sir. I mean, there's been a move on the part of Democrats to say this is Republicans' fault for resisting, reining in the number of guns or the severe guns that people like this are allowed to get. How do you feel about that, and whether there is a middle ground here, even Democrats who might find themselves also reluctant to take on Hollywood when it comes to violent video games and movies and that sort of thing, that maybe there is a middle ground here that both attack their sacred cows?
Well, I just think that that's unfortunate that you have scapegoating going on. I mean, most Americans still believe in the Second Amendment right as a fundamental, inherent constitutional right. And the bottom line is, if you take a look at the Texas shooting, that you had an armed civilian who basically brought that to a close. The Steve Scalise shooting and the congressional shooting, you had armed Capitol Police there. It's not the guns; it's malevolent hearts. It's people with evil intention that we really have to agree is where we need to stop the breakdown. We need to prevent those people. And that's where it's really difficult, because our system is basically one that we prosecute crimes after they've been committed. We don't have the ability to anticipate always and stop crime. So we're in a very delicate situation. So I don't think the scapegoating really helps either side.
All right, Congressman, thank you very much. We appreciate it with all